Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples Integrated Recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes or bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Today, I think this will be a long one. Probably the majority of the work that I do with clients centers around trauma. And I think that this word is misunderstood or always just assigned with people think trauma means that you got your legs blown off in war or that there was sexual abuse or something like that. But it is far broader than that. So I didn't start in this field doing trauma work. In fact, I didn't really have much trauma understanding at all. I started in addiction type stuff, both professionally and personally. That's where my attention went first, was substances, behaviors, relapse, recovery, and the mechanics of getting people to stop doing the thing that was killing them. For a long time, that made sense because addiction is loud, it's measurable, it's messy, it has a lot of consequences. People lose jobs, relationships, their freedom. And so the beginning of my work was, how do you help this person stop? But if you spend enough time in peer-led recovery or in treatment settings and one-on-one work talking about addiction, there is a pattern that is almost impossible to miss because you can remove the drugs and alcohol, you can build structure, you can add accountability, stack meetings, routines, rules, service, all of that crap, and underneath, a lot of people still don't feel okay. I have a lot of clients who have been sober for a long time and have been going to 12-step meetings for a long time and internally still agitated, empty. Some may be trading their substances for work, exercise, relationships, productivity, service, and they think that it is growth. But the standard responses to discomfort in their life are usually some version of stop feeling sorry for yourself, page 417, accept it, do more work, serve more, get out of your head, be grateful. And none of those things touch what is underneath. So what I came to understand is that addiction is very often a visible layer of a very old problem for that person, a nervous system that never learned safety, an identity that was shaped around shame, and a body that learned early that being present was dangerous. And substances work because they regulate what never got to be regulated. They might quiet what was never soothed. They can interrupt what was never resolved. But when you take the substances away and then you don't address the system that is underneath it, the system doesn't magically reorganize itself. It just starts looking for another solution. So this episode is not about willpower or maturity or motivation. It is not about addiction. So if the addiction part here does not land for you, that's not the core component of this. And it's also not about blaming your parents or living in the past. It's about understanding how trauma actually works, especially the kind that isn't dramatic enough to qualify as trauma in the DSM or what people think trauma is, and why many well-intentioned approaches with recovery, growth, and getting better are not scratching that itch. Because if you offer someone structure, discipline, and endless service without addressing the wound that is underneath, you're not healing anything. You're just giving the nervous system a different job to do. So that is what I am going to unpack today. I think a lot of people get hung up right out of the gate by the word trauma itself because many people are working from an old definition, a narrow one that came out of war psychology and acute PTSD, something horrific or unmistakable, a single overwhelming event that knocks the system offline and then forces the body into fight, flight, or freeze. And this definition matters because big T or capital T trauma is a DSM matching criteria. So that can be like combat, sex assault, severe accident, a natural disaster, an experience that overwhelms the nervous system and then leaves a mark. Nobody is minimizing that. But here is the problem, is if trauma is framed only in this way, then most people disqualify themselves, and probably 80% of the clients that I see for trauma do not meet this PTSD DSM criteria of a capital T trauma. So they might look at their childhood and say, well, nothing really bad happened to me, meaning like maybe they weren't beat or sexually abused, or that there was no obvious catastrophe. They can't point at a certain thing and say that's where everything changed. And because of that, they miss what actually shaped them. But modern trauma research is starting to show clinically, neurologically, relationally, the majority of trauma is not about what happened. Often it's about what didn't happen. And so this is what some circles call little t trauma, which is not something terrible occurring. It is something that was necessary that failed to occur. That can look like connection that didn't happen, protection that wasn't there, attunement that was inconsistent or absent, validation that never landed, and needs that were inconvenient, minimized, critiqued, or ignored. And that is invisible trauma. No measurable marks on the exterior, but interior relational wounds, and far more common than people think. Probably 80% or more of people carry this in some form. Many of them will never even make it to therapy. And that number alone should tell you something. If trauma was only from catastrophic events, the math wouldn't work. But when trauma is being described as chronic emotional misattunement, the picture changes. This is why you will meet people who are functional, intelligent, disciplined, and successful, and internally exhausted. Many of them, nothing bad happened to them, but they can't even articulate why their life feels the way that it does. So a helpful way to think about this comes from math. You have simple numbers and complex numbers. Simple trauma is a one-time event. Complex trauma is ongoing exposure to unsafe conditions. Complex trauma doesn't mean that it's worse. It means chronic. It means long-term. And it can be built out of both big T and little t experiences. Most of the time, it's a blend. Picture a child who grows up in an environment where connection is inconsistent or unsafe. Maybe nobody hits them or abandons them, but emotionally they're alone. Mom is withdrawn, dad maybe is alcoholic and is volatile, affection is conditional, attention comes with strings attached, and love is then earned, not given. This child's nervous system doesn't need an explosion to register danger. It reads the room constantly. Tone, mood, facial expressions, silence, withdrawal, anger, and at some point, the child's gut makes a decision. This isn't safe. And if you're an adult and you feel unsafe, then you probably fight or flee. You may leave the situation, you may set boundaries, you get distance. A child can't do that. They're too small, they're too dependent to run, so their system adapts. When people talk about trauma responses, often you'll hear people say fight, flight, and freeze, but that is incomplete because children also adopt a fourth response, which I sometimes see with survivors of abuse or people who are in abusive relationships, which is fawning. Freeze is an internal escape. Fawn is relational survival. If I can't leave, if I can't stop this, then I'll just be whatever you need me to be. I'll read the room, I'll manage your emotions, I'll take care of you, I'll suppress myself, because staying connected, even if it's with an unsafe person, is safer than me being alone. And this is intelligence under constraint. So a child who fawns learns early, my needs are dangerous, and they might become overly responsible, helpful, high-performing, agreeable, pleasant, mature beyond their years. They may even get praised for it. You're so strong, you don't need anything, you're so mature, you're so easy, you get such great grades. And from the outside, they may look like the healthiest kid in the family, but underneath, something else is forming. The part that people don't see is that these adaptations work, they help a child survive, but they come with a delayed cost. So, fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, this same person walks into adulthood carrying a belief that they have never examined. Love has to be earned, being authentic is risky, and needs make me a burden. They don't do this consciously. It lives underneath their behavior, so they overfunction. They fix, they give, anticipate, perform, and for a long time it works until it doesn't. They end up in relationships that feel unbalanced. They stay in jobs that drain them, and they are in dynamics where they are needed but not truly known and witnessed. And eventually they ask the question that brings them into therapy or recovery or self-work: why is all of it so heavy and hard? And that's where a lot of people are stuck, because they assume that the problem is their relationship or their level of stress or maybe their partner, and rarely are they asking a harder question: what did I learn to believe about myself before I even had language for it? Once a child realizes that being fully themselves isn't leading to safety or connection, they don't stop trying, they adapt. I'm going to go through a couple of roles that are not chosen consciously, and they're not personality quirks, not preferences. They're solutions that are built under pressure. A child's nervous system is doing math in real time. What keeps me attached? What keeps me from being rejected? What keeps things feeling stable enough to survive? And over time, patterns form. And families can even organize around a few predictable roles. The first is the hero. This is the one that people admire. He or she is responsible, reliable, mature, high-achieving, conscientious. Often this is the firstborn, not always, and this child figures out early that competence earns approval. If I am useful, and if I'm performing, or if I don't cause problems, then I stay connected. They become emotionally self-sufficient way too early. They don't ask for much. They take care of others, and they are constantly being praised. And the message that they absorb is that they are valued for what they do, not for who they are. Fast forward this kid to adulthood, and you see the cost that they are overfunctioning in relationships. They struggle to rest without guilt. They might feel resentful and not know why, exhausted by being needed, and terrified of being unnecessary. And the most dangerous part is that society rewards this role relentlessly. They get promoted, they get a lot of respect, praise, and validation, which makes it hard to question. Second is the comedian, the child that learns that tension dissolves when people are laughing. They read emotional climates quickly, they can deflect with humor, they keep things light, they are the entertainer. And in a chaotic home, this can temporarily stabilize things. Because if people are laughing, then they're not fighting. And if they're laughing, they're connected, at least superficially. As adults, these people are charming, social, and well-liked, but intimacy is difficult. They avoid being serious, or they avoid vulnerability, they avoid conflict, and if things get heavy, they just disappear or joke their way out of it because depth feels dangerous. And underneath, the humor is a fear, if I'm not entertaining, I might be rejected. Third is the lost child, or the invisible one. This one adapts by shrinking. They decide early on that needs are a problem, that attention brings danger, and so they stay unnoticed to be safe. They disappear into books, fantasy, silence. They don't ask for much, and they are self-contained. Adults who grew up this way often say things like, I don't know what I really want, or like whatever you want to do, or I'm fine either way. And they often struggle with agency or asserting preferences with being seen. Not because they don't have depth, but because they learned early that being visible was unsafe. Fourth is the scapegoat or problem child. This is the one that refuses to cooperate with denial. They react outwardly, they may be angry, they push back, and in an unhealthy system, this child is the container for everything that the family doesn't want to see. So any of the tension, dysfunction, and unresolved pain is projected on this person. If it weren't for you, everything would be fine. And as adults, scapegoats get a defiant edge. They expect authority to be corrupt, they anticipate betrayal, and they push first to avoid being pushed. Ironically, they are probably the most honest one about what's wrong, but they pay the highest relational cost for it. These roles do not disappear on their own. This is the mistake that people make later in life, is thinking that these are habits, but these are identity-level strategies that are built to secure attachment under threat, and that is the reason that insight alone will not dissolve them. You can intellectually understand your role, but still feel pulled to perform it because the nervous system learned it before there was language. And here's what matters is that these roles don't show up as problems when you are young, they show up as competence. They only become visible when intimacy, rest, and mutuality is required. And that's why a lot of people don't trace their struggles back to childhood. They assume that they are situational, like marrying the wrong person, or being stressed out by a job, or not finding the right balance. Rarely are they observing the very thing that I was praised for is the thing that is actually costing me. Because if success came from adaptation, then questioning the adaptation feels like you're questioning your worth. If your identity is built around something being strong, helpful, funny, agreeable, or independent, then letting go of that role might feel like collapse. So people optimize the role instead of questioning it. They become more productive, more insightful, more disciplined. They have more self-improvement, which brings us to the next part, shame. This is where a lot of conversations about trauma can kind of fall apart because people think shame is an emotion, like something you feel when you mess up, embarrassment, guilt. But that's not what I'm talking about. That version of shame comes and goes. You feel it, you repair it, and move on. What sits underneath complex trauma is something different. Shame at this level is not an emotion, It is a core belief about identity. And once it's installed, it doesn't announce itself, it just runs in the background. The deepest definition of shame is simple and brutal, and it is usually some variant of "there's something wrong with me." Not "I did something wrong," but instead "I am wrong." And that belief forms early before a child has cognitive capacity to even evaluate context. A child can't conclude, "My parents were overwhelmed, emotionally immature, dysregulated, or unavailable." A child needs caregivers to feel solid. So the system chooses the only explanation that preserves attachment. It must be me. I'm too sensitive, too needy, too much, not enough, unlovable the way that I am. And once that belief forms, everything else organizes around compensating for it. Many of the people who are controlled by shame swear that they don't feel ashamed, because shame does not show up always as collapse. It can show up as performance. Take someone who grew up neglected but learned that they could get validation through achievement, attractiveness, intelligence, or competence. They feel good when they're praised, desired, needed, or admired. But if you ask them, "Do you feel ashamed?" of course they say no. They will confuse relief from shame with absence of shame. But look at the mechanism. They feel okay only when something is externally confirming their value. That's the tell. If your sense of worth depends on productivity, approval, performance, or being needed, then shame is what's running the system. Here's another way to understand it. Children learn who they are by looking into the mirror. Not literal ones, but relational ones. If a caregiver reflects back, "You matter, you're welcome here, your emotions make sense, you don't have to do anything to earn my love," this likely leads to secure attachment. But in complex trauma, these mirrors are distorted. A child grows up seeing themselves reflected as someone who is inconvenient, burdensome, disappointing, or only valued when they feel useful. And then this distorted image becomes familiar, normal, and trusted. Later in life, if someone offers them an accurate mirror, which is respect or genuine appreciation, feels like it doesn't land, or that maybe it's suspicious. "You're just saying that to be nice," or "You don't really mean that," or "What do you actually want from me?" Because the nervous system rejects the accurate mirror because it doesn't match the internal template. And this is why some of these people cannot receive compliments. Once shame is installed, relationships stop being about connection and they start being about management. You manage impressions, emotions, and outcomes instead of entering relationships as an equal where your needs matter as much as the other person's. You enter them negotiating for safety, like, "I'll be low maintenance, I'll be whoever you need me to be." And that can set up imbalance from the start, which is why people then end up feeling unseen, resentful, or exhausted. Their relationship is organized around compensation, not mutuality. Let's separate the difference between shame and guilt because it gets butchered. Guilt is about behavior like, "I did something that violated my values." That is an uncomfortable but healthy thing that motivates repair. Shame is about identity, like, "I am the problem." Guilt can be resolved, shame cannot, because you can't fix who you are. So your system compensates instead with achievement, control, people-pleasing, withdrawal, perfectionism, defiance. They're all different strategies for the exact same thing. Shame shows up as chronic self-doubt, inability to rest, worry about being a burden, discomfort of receiving care, suspicion of other people's kindness, overfunctioning in relationships, and none of these may scream trauma because they might look like preference or personality or circumstances. But at some point, the compensation stops working. Everything that we've talked on so far with this point is about belief and identity, but none of that exists in isolation. It's all carried by the nervous system. For a child growing up in an unsafe or emotionally unpredictable environment, the present moment is not neutral. The present is where needs go unmet, emotions get punished, connection fails, and danger appears without warning. So the nervous system learns something very critical. Being here right now in this moment is not safe. And once that lesson is learned, the system starts prioritizing escape, not physically, but internally. And this is where a state called dissociation can come in. That doesn't always mean spacing out or losing time. That's more the extreme end. It can be subtle, like staying busy, productive, overthinking, fantasizing, intellectualizing, scrolling, noise in the background, anything that keeps awareness away from the present moment, because the present moment contains sensations, emotions, and memories that were never resolved. If a child can't fight or can't flee, the system goes into freeze, which sounds calm, but it's not. It's really immobilization with awareness. The body shuts down, the brain is active. And this is why people with complex trauma live in their head. Thinking becomes safer than feeling. Analyzing is safer than sensing. Fantasy, safer than reality. So, they live in a state of, if I stay in my head, I don't have to feel my body. As long as I stay busy, I don't have to feel the emotions. And that is survival intelligence. So, you want a clean marker of unresolved complex trauma? Put someone in a quiet room with nothing to do. No phone, music, distraction, and for some people that could feel restful, but for others it is unbearable. Thoughts race, their restlessness would build, and discomfort floods because quiet removes their escape. And when escape routes disappear, the system is forced to face what's underneath. Unprocessed emotion, unmet needs, old fear, old grief, old shame, and the body remembers what the mind has been avoiding. Fantasy deserves its own mention because it's often misunderstood. Imagination itself is not pathological. In fact, it's essential. The problem isn't fantasy, it's living there. For children who couldn't resolve pain in real life, fantasy becomes the only place where they are able to have connection, to feel safe, where needs are met, and where endings are happy. So they love books, TV, daydreams, stories, scenarios, because fantasy gives them relief, and relief reinforces the strategy. Later in life, fantasy often shows up around new relationships, new careers, major life transitions. It could be like video games or endless books. The brain is imagining perfect outcomes that regulate fear, like, if this works out, everything will finally be okay. And when reality inevitably fails to match the fantasy, the disappointment hits really hard, not because the situation was bad, but because it was carrying the weight of the resolution. Another common adaptation is overthinking. Some people pride themselves on being super analytical, rational, logical, or detached, but here's the function. If I'm thinking, then that means I'm not feeling. The brain becomes a problem-solving machine, constantly scanning for solutions. Why? Because unresolved problems signal danger for the nervous system. The brain believes, if I can just solve this, I will be safe. So it keeps on looping. Option A, option B, D, E, F, Worst case scenario, contingency planning. And that is not intelligence or thoughtfulness, it's hypervigilance dressed up as intellect. Here is the irony. During the day, the busyness is suppressing thinking, but at night, when the stimulation drops, the brain is roaringly online, and that is why a lot of people who have trauma struggle with sleep. Their nervous system was never allowed to rest safely. Many people will try to fix this with discipline, meditation, mindfulness, stillness practice, and often have an underlying feeling this isn't working. And the stillness is removing their defenses, but if their system is constantly organized around escape, then stillness feels threatening until safety is built inside the body, not just a mental understanding of it. This is why trauma healing is not about forcing presence. It's about creating conditions where presence can become tolerable. So all of this explains why people function how they do, but the explanation alone does not heal. So, like any good sales pitch, I've given you the problem, right? What's the solution? What's the list? What's the method? How do we heal? That impulse makes sense, and that's the same impulse that built the adaptations in the first place. Tell me what I need to do so that I can finally be fixed, and that is not how it works. Complex trauma doesn't heal through insight, optimization, or effort. I have a lot of clients who come in and say, I just need to get to the root of everything, and I can give them the root in like our first meeting. You had a effed up childhood. Boom, we did it. That's the root. Complex trauma does not heal through the insight, it heals through repatterning, and that is a very slow burn by definition. Let's be precise about why. People are approaching trauma the same way that they would a physical injury, like something's wrong, you get a diagnosis, you get the treatment, time passes, boom, you're better. And that model works for a broken bone or a infection, but it doesn't work for trauma, because in trauma, nothing is broke. Your nervous system adapted correctly to the messed up conditions that it was forced to operate in. So there is no fix in a traditional sense. There's just something that needs an update. And updates don't install when the system has been trained for years in the opposite direction. You cannot heal complex trauma in an environment that requires your old survival strategies. So you can learn about it when you're there, you can intellectualize it, but it cannot be rewired there. Healing requires felt safety, not conceptual safety. You can't think your way out of a wound that is a feeling wound. And felt safety comes through another regulated nervous system. A child resolves distress through co-regulation. They cry, somebody comes, their system settles, and then the loop completes. But in complex trauma, that loop is never completed, so the nervous system never learns how to come down on its own. And that is why self-soothing can feel fake or inaccessible at first, because it's never been modeled. This is where safe relationships matter. Not anything that is perfect or magical, but consistent and regulated. And that looks like therapy, group work, peer support, corrective relationships, not advice, but experience. The nervous system doesn't learn safety through an explanation, it learns through repetition. Revisiting trauma without regulation is not going to heal anything. In fact, it might just reinforce it. Feeling pain again does not resolve pain. Resolution happens when the memory is re-experienced with new conditions that include safety, choice, support, an adult perspective, and containment. Otherwise, you're just reactivating the same old circuitry. That's why trauma work without pacing can destabilize people, and why just feel it is not responsible. The body has to be included. A lot of complex trauma is pre-verbal. It happened before there was language, and you can't talk your way out of something that is stored without words. And that's why somatic work is really important, with breath, movement, sensation, and orientation. That is nervous system communication. The body has to learn that a threat is not present, and words alone cannot do that. This can frustrate people because healing doesn't move in a straight line. It looks like progress, regression, stabilizing, destabilizing, integration, reactivation, over and over and over again. When I work with clients who relapse, that is just part of the process. In fact, I just expect it. And so I think that this might be something that some peer programs may sometimes get wrong, is telling people, guess you're just not ready. They're ready. Most people have to learn from a lot of repetition. People want a timeline. How long does this take? And the honest answer is uncomfortable, because if I had to guess, I would say probably 1 or 2 years. Yeah. And then the integration continues for life. That's not being pessimistic. That's like real numbers. Because if you are trying to build capacity with history, that takes time. Healing does not mean never being triggered, never having fear, never struggling. It means your triggers will resolve faster, that you look for what choices you have, that presence becomes tolerable, rest doesn't have to feel like something that you have to earn, and boundaries can stop feeling like threats, because you're not becoming a different person, you're becoming a less managed person. Complex trauma is not about becoming better, it's about becoming available to your body, your emotions, to connection, to the present moment. And that was something that wasn't safe at one point, but now it can be learned slowly, imperfectly, relationally. That's the work, is not finishing yourself, not fixing yourself, but finally living in a system that doesn't have to just survive. And that is why this kind of work can't be rushed, optimized, or gamed. It has to be lived. And it's lived one day at a time. That's doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we are all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. And in the meantime, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.